main event. So we're all here to see Lisa Fernandez. So Lisa is a Trinidadian street photographer who focuses on documenting the daily lives of people around the world. She's fascinated by rituals and traditions and life as it happens on the streets. And her portfolio is filled with images of people and their interactions with the world around them. For several years, she has focused locally on covering traditional carnival characters and events. And more recently, she has expanded her photography documentary to include religious and cultural events. Her aim is to tell the story of home. Internationally, Lisa travels and studies with several National Geographic photographers in the last few years. These workshops have taken her to more than 10 countries. Lisa was also chosen for the Photography Master Retreat, a one-week retreat in a remote hamlet in the south of France, a workshop where photographers are guided by 3 mentors to reflect on their work and its meaning. So without further ado, let's have Lisa.
Hopefully everybody can hear me, I'm quite loud. So I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling today more than anything else. I'm not going to show a ton of pictures. Some of you may have seen my work, some have not. My most recent description of my work, which I actually thought was quite a compliment, was I am now a fusion of street, travel, documentary, and arts. And I thought that was an interesting take on my work. So I do street photography, available light. You will not see me with a flash. I am probably terrified of a flash. And I really work a lot with people. So I know for a lot of photographers, when I do things, they say, I'm challenged working with people. And if you are studying internationally, one of the things they always say is, you need to put people in your pictures. So we can take tons of beautiful pictures. And if you're looking to be a photographer that just sells to magazines and has beautiful photos, I may not be the best guide because that's not what I do. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what I'm showing right now in terms of stories. If you could actually, Romania. Yeah. So this is a recent trip. So having worked with National Geographic teachers now for the last 5 years, am I in the way? I mean, when we sit down. So I've worked with National Geographic for maybe the last 5 years. And one of the things that you always hear is you need to tell a story. You need to give the different aspects of it. So this was a trip to Romania. And my crew loves to drag everybody's ass out of bed at 6 a.m. There's some of us who think that you should never sleep beyond the workshop times. So how our workshops usually go, just so you understand, is every day we go somewhere. And we're sent out and we're told, come back with 5 pictures the next day and get those 5 pictures critiqued. It's really hard to take your work down to 5 pictures. And more, we start hearing about, you need to tell a story. Well, what's a story? Generally, you find that, you go out and you take this great picture and people will either say, that's a nice picture, but, can you explain it? What is it I'm looking at? And then you've lost whatever presentation you were hoping to have. So this is a story, a mini story. Definitely, if I had 3 more days on location, I would spend a lot of time. So everybody dragged us out of bed and we walked and we walked and we walked and we walked for an hour and a half in the fields. And I'm like, really, guys, I don't want to take a picture of the sunrise. And in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours into the field, we found this family. And this is their home. This is where they live. If we go on to the next picture. It's not just forward and down. It should just go forward. Yeah, it's in the right order, right? Okay. So this is the woman with her puppy, who is all of about 6 months old and is going to grow into a monster, Romanian Shepherd. And they milk cows to make money. And this is their lovely cow shed in the middle of nowhere. And these bins, you'll find Romanian families on the street all over the place, because a lot of Romanian families have 2 and 3 cows. And they take this milk into one central depot in the village and they get paid for it. And this is a little extra thing. And then of course, this is the couple. If I was out there exploring, then I would continue that story. And I did try to continue the story a little bit into the village, trailing where that whole thing of where does the milk go? How do the families live off of it? what happens in their homes. You are driving on the streets in Romania and you will see cows just coming down the hill and walking down the middle of the road. And they walk down the road cute as ever, and then all of a sudden you see two cows split off and they're gone home. And you're like, it's like dogs. But this is what happens. So when I talk about following a story, it really is, you have to get really tight in. You need to get the details. If I had to follow this story, again, I would follow where does the milk go in the first place. And in the second place, I would follow the individual home. I would try and crawl in that trailer with them and see what do they eat. Do they actually use that milk for anything else? In Mongolia, they use the milk and they make cheese, and they make it themselves. And you have the grandparents and all, and you have generations of families. So when I talk about stories, it is how do we link our pictures? Because we can have these great series of pictures.
Is it part of the culture with this cows and
Very much part of the culture. Now, not in all of Romania. So you won't find this in the downtown, but you'll find this was close to the Transylvania area. So you'll find that this is part of, and they literally have a milk depot, and you see people rolling along with their little pull carts and their 2 things of milk, and they trade for cash, and it's like extra money for them towards their homes.
So this was these cows and the milk. This was their primary source of income.
This is their primary source of income for this particular family. Had I had 4 or 5 days there, yeah, I would have been up there every single day with my 0 language skills in Romania and trying to
Google Translate.
yeah. And I've done weird things. I followed some strange guy into his house in Romania and he played the violin for me. I just
Whoa.
found him on the street.
Wow.
But again, it's that taking a chance and how do you throw yourselves into people's lives in order to tell a story? What is a series of stories? So when I talk about the photography master retreat, I got to go into that. I had to submit a project. How many of you have a project that you're working on now? Anybody? Yeah. I'm not up in the air. But you know, it's really weird because with all my travel, I have friends who are working on projects of photographing bathrooms all over the world. And I'm like, really? Oh, you're gonna go and photograph a bathroom? But they've got really, really interesting pictures. I have friends who crawl into every barber shop they see. And that's what their project is. And anybody who is teaching or showing will tell you, find something to photograph and keep photographing it and keep photographing it and keep photographing it. So I see my work 3 years ago, I see my work now, and there's like this major difference. And I will actually probably show what one of my final presentations was. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, I don't like any of it. It's 2 years old. But in that story is where do you start your story and how do you keep building and building and building on it? And really when I talk stories, it is if you want to submit work for international. So how many people still enter competitions internationally? And why do you enter?
Just to gauge my exposure, like I used to like to go on 500 px. That's before it was boardable by the Chinese company, and I would get like my images would go upcoming, it would go fresh, then upcoming, and then it would be popular within an hour. Then I know my images was good enough, and I get like people from all over the world saying, "Wow!" and like big landscape photographer from like Paris were like, "Wow, your images are like yes, okay, I did something big, you know." It's just something to boost your.
So do you get submission reviews?
No, you have to pay for that actually.
Why not pay for it?
Well, I actually was confused about my talent, and I had paid. There's this company online that you could submit up to 10 images, and they give positive feedback. Or I'm hoping it was positive, but constructive criticism. And what they told me was my Photoshop editing compositions were more stronger than my actual photography. But that was 2 years ago, and last year November I got best photography in the art society. So like, yay.
So, but submission reviews, and I've heard people say, well, I'm not going for submission review because they're just going to give me a positive review, so they hook, line, and sinker, they're going to make me submit again. That's kind of nuts.
Yes, it is.
It is kind of nuts, but
Yes.
I've been told that. I've been told by people, well, they're just going to give you a good review so that,
No.
and I've done lens culture quite regularly, and they've actually emailed me and said, aren't you going to submit for certain things? They pull pictures that I haven't even submitted and asked me if I'm not submitting for something. And I've literally gone from reviews that are this long to big long reviews with suggestions of what I should do with my photos, where they see it going,
Wow.
what's happening. But that is really sticking to it,
Yes.
sticking to a story and being able to write about what you're doing. And I mean, I'll happily, if anybody wants, share what one of those reviews looks like. You know, and even the submission. So I had submitted the Blue Devils. I just did it recently. So your child to pull up some of these, go back, we close it up. Right, so under blue, the first one. So this is something that I'm working on now. I'm obsessed with Blue Devils. My story with Blue Devils is as a child, you always got told, pay the devil, and you always heard the sounds. And I've now gotten so close to them that I tell them sometimes that they're going to singe my hair. But I'm very close to you guys. And I've started to write longer and longer and longer stories. And this has become a big thing. So this is actually a small part of it. And again, I'll do pitchfork and the smoke because somebody living away doesn't know. So you need to tell them they carry a fork. There's smoke coming off of it. There's the sound of the drums. There's the sounds of the whistles. There's the tin pans. So I write a whole story with the picture and try to build on it. And then if you go to the next one, again, and this is something that you look at, it's really close. I'm shooting very, very, very tight these days. This is kind of where I'm going. But what do you leave in? There were two variations on this. One side had a whole lot more white on it, but then your eye gets drawn to the white. So as fabulous as the picture was, you lost some of the feel of the picture. We go to the next one. Right? So again, what do I choose to carry and what do I try to lose up? Because I'm trying to get that feeling of the sound. So you could almost look at it and know that he's shouting. You want to hear what he's saying. So that's what's happening. And then if you go to the next one, again, this is the same character, but I've tried to incorporate the elements so you can see this is happening in a city. So when you're thinking of stories, one of the things you always have to do is tight, 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 and then start going outwards for what is surrounding them. So you're isolating the center of it. So if I'm photographing in a church and somebody's doing restorations, I'll photograph their hands. And then I'll start pulling back and back and back and do the whole story. Documentary photography for me sometimes really is, if I look at it more as I'm doing a news item. In my head, that's what that is. Telling a story could be somebody's life. And it could be very, very simple. Telling a story, so I've got a friend who's doing a story right now. Personally, I could not tell you why he gets picked up internationally. And he's not local, but he gets picked up internationally. And he literally goes and finds these old US towns. And they're not falling apart. They just look somehow deserted. And his story is how the US has kind of, you had these small towns that were all over the place. And people have started to move away. And it's almost an abandoned field. And his whole series is this very abandoned field. So the story is a story of small town America. I don't know that you would really consider it a documentary. Maybe I have another friend who is following, and she's written several books, but she was following in the 70s a rundown hotel in LA where they had a whole lot of transvestites. And she had done this whole story, and it was almost a documentary rather than a story because she did it room by room.
Wow.
So she did room 1, room 2, the inhabitants of each of these rooms, because it was almost like a long-term hotel. So for me, there's that, it's a very fine line of where it is, and then what inspires you. There is a guy that I went to a workshop with as well. He has done a whole series, and I tried to do some of his work. And funny, he was trying to do a copy of somebody else he had seen, and didn't succeed. And he went to amusement parks all over the States, and he did black and whites. And they are the creepiest black and whites that you have ever seen. But he wanted that kind of feel of Cartier-Bresson and that personal people feel. And somehow we ended up with this very creepy series of black and whites. And when we did the photography mastery suite in France and he was challenged on it, he found that in his childhood, he was always in churches and hearing about religion. And when you started to take pages from the Bible and compare some of his work with what was going on in the amusement park, the dragons, the look of damnation and hell, and he stood there and he was almost in tears because he could not understand until that was forced through. Where does the inspiration for your work come? And it's finding that deep in your heart about what do you want to do. So my
like an
fascination.
epiphany in the
Yes.
workshop.
And that very much was. Let me tell you, I went to France. Only 13 people get accepted a year.
Wow.
It's 3 mentors. One used to be the editor for New Yorker magazine, visual editor for 15 years, and 2 of them teach in the States. And you have to submit a portfolio. When I got accepted, I actually thought, this is a scam. This is a
What year that
scam.
was?
And this was 2 years ago, and I did a whole lot of research and I couldn't find it, and I flew to this place, and you're like hours on a bus, and I'm like, they're gonna kill me somewhere. Yeah, I just know this, right? So you get in the room and you do a presentation of your original work, and everybody starts to get up, and this person has written 3 books, and this person has taught for the last 20 years and had a camera in their hand since they were 6, and I was like, I picked up a camera like 7 years ago. This is not going to go well, right? So, even like 2 days into it, I said to the lead person, I said, how did I get into this? And she said, we look for an emerging artist every year. And I said, okay, now I feel like a little bit more settled, but it was very difficult. And I watched people with absolutely stunning work who had 4 books. And they laid out the most beautiful pictures for the Arctic and the ice melting and talking about what's happening environmentally. Mm-hmm. And the editor, who was visual editor, who was our mentor, because we each had one mentor, she looked at her and she said, yeah, they're beautiful pictures of the Arctic. And I was like, I don't even want to show my work. But she was interested in my work because she felt that I had a different story, and there were 10 million people photographing the ice. And there's 10 million people doing these beautiful environmental stories. Now, that same photographer had actually gone in, and she'd gone into old abandoned places where the Russians had been in and pulled out to the Arctic, and she photographed the things they left behind. And that was more interesting because you saw people that had an entire rec room, and it looked like aliens just picked you up and took you out, and they just left it like that. So it's, what does this story become? What inspires you to create this story? So this is the Blue Devils. I think there's one more in the series. Again, this is very small. I'm only doing like 5 or so 6 pictures, but for somebody overseas, they would not know about the idea of collecting money, right? So I would shoot this several different ways. And then
When you're shooting something like this, is it more reactive, or do you have like a story? You have a shot list in your mind of what you want to get going into this?
the longer I've been doing it, the more I have a shot list in my mind. But sometimes it's not good to have a shot list in your mind. I have done Ghana Dahar for years, and the first year I did it, I have a shot that I love, but I was too junior of a photographer for it to be as clean as I want it to be. And I've gone back chasing that shot every year. And every year I'm pissed off at myself because I'm like, you know what, I've missed other things chasing that shot to recreate it. So you have to look at different things. Best thing I've ever been taught, stand in a spot, find your spot, and wait for something to happen.
Wait for something to
You're talking about a little bit more.
Editing your own work. Okay, so I don't actually Photoshop any of my work, but I do. Editing for me is just paring down my work. I use Lightroom, and I literally go through everything and flag it. Love it, hate it, love it, hate it. If I hate it, it's instantly off the shots. And then I start going down and down and down and down and down. And really, I look for clarity, Obviously, you're going to throw everything out if it's not, unless you're looking for visual blur, toss it out. If it's not crisp enough, toss it out. Then you start looking for really little things, you know. There were obviously other pictures of this. Let's see if there's anything in here that would, you know, you look for, where's the pole? If this pole was enough to divide this picture, and it would create a visual divide, that pole in the background was too white, I'd throw the picture out. If there was a glaring white spot that drew my eye away from somebody, I'd throw the picture out.
So you wouldn't burn it down or crop it out?
I don't do any editing really. And I don't believe in cropping out, because when you crop things, you actually, there's always a visual difference to the picture. Always a visual. If I'm desperate to crop something, I would never use it personally for show. If somebody asked me for something and they wanted it for a magazine or for a newspaper or whatever, I'm like, yeah, crop it, use it, whatever you want. But I would never use it for my personal look.
Is that because when you submit things internationally, they do allow cropping?
They do allow cropping. If you are working on the workshops of National Geographic, you are not allowed to crop or edit anything. You cannot lighten, you cannot darken, you cannot, nothing. You cannot crop. So that's how I've been trained. And really and truly, if you take a picture, if you take any picture and you take the picture and then you take the crop in, it's never the same picture visually.
Sorry, so you just said for National Geographic, you can't crop, you can't light, you can't.
Well, for the workshops,
The workshop.
yes,
Does
but
that
the
mean-
photographers actually do it when they choose their work.
But are you shooting JPEG with the camera modification, or are you shooting RAW?
I shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time.
And which version would you submit to the workshop?
What we do for we just take it down to a JPEG size for Lightroom to be able to use it for critique.
There are some in camera, you know, the camera would have brightness and.
Yeah,
color
yeah. I really don't adjust. I know there are, and we've had big arguments and debates about that, because there's a guy who goes on a lot of workshops. He does a lot of adjustment in camera, and his work looks like it's edited. So there's always a huge fight about whether your work is edited. There's that aspect of it, and there's beautifully edited work. It won't make something like a National Geographic or an international competition to any extent, because of the fact that they're not looking for the photo to be edited to the point where it's not the original photo. So editing your work is really important, more for choices than anything else, and it's sometimes very, very hard. You know, I've had people who say to me when I say, God, it's hard for me to get down to 10 images when magazines ask for something, and I'm like, it's so hard to get down to work. Even for me to choose 10 images to submit to a competition, sometimes it's harder than I think it is. But I start looking at certain things. So in this series, I would look at everybody has kind of got the same glare at me almost. The same kind of singular look. They're looking straight at the camera, straight through me, straight to the viewer. In another case, I may say that, and I've had this with teachers, you shoot everything at the same length. So working on a fixed lens, working on a fixed distance. A lot of people don't like working on a fixed lens. But if you have a fixed lens and you work on it, you'll be surprised at visually the kind of seamlessness that happens with your pictures. It automatically, even if you're taking a scene from far away and close, you get a kind of seamlessness. So that's another way of working on your work to get it to look cohesive. And sometimes you gotta tape your lens at a certain, if you don't have. Zooming. Zooming is really not one of those things that works great for if you want to submit work to compete, if you want strong work. They will tell you, make your feet do the zooming for you. And you need to get out there and just keep on it. So editing and choosing is hard. It is best if you have something that you're working on or an idea of what you're working on. So I will look at, if I was doing the First Peoples, I have quite a bunch of stuff with the First Peoples, I would go and I would shoot several different ceremonies and then try to piece it together as a story in order to edit it. And there's a lot of it that gets thrown out. And I throw out things that are distracting. So I throw out somebody on the side of the road with a white t-shirt. I throw out something if everybody looks like they're in costume and you've got this kind of one random person that doesn't work. But yet I didn't throw it out for the Blue Devil with the red because you needed the crowd there, that it is a performance. So I want the crowd included. So when you're editing, you need to look at what you want included. Do you want it to be an appearance of this is what is happening and it's a picture of time and everybody's in a costume, so you don't want the people there? Or do you want it to be that this is a person in a costume in a performance? So looking for a lot of distracting things and whether you place them there. And sometimes it's really hard. You see, you've got a great photo and you've got one thing and yeah, you can make the decision, crop it out. You could erase it if you so desire. But it's shooting to not have that problem. I mean, I did a photo safari with Sarita and Chad recently. We had a good laugh because everybody went up there with the whole idea of these beautiful sunrise and sunrise at Paramin, and it was lovely. But for me to take pictures of sunrise is like asking me to go stir crazy. So I was just waiting to get to
The other part.
the other part. Where's the people? You know? And there was I on a ladder climbing up inside the person's kitchen window because this works for me that she's on this old stove cooking, and I wanted to do this in black and white, and I wanted to talk about how we're very much into food and how we welcome people into our homes and what is our feeling of home. So that's where I would kind of script something. Cover the editing. Any other questions that you have about editing?
No, I mean, it's interesting that you don't crop it on me because a couple of workshops I've been to, I mean, they with photojournalists especially, that's always, they've told me, and one in particular, he will watch your work and he'll say you crop that image. Like he could look.
You can see it, yeah.
And he will be able to tell you which images were cropped and which images were not cropped.
Yeah. You can
And it's
see
the same aspect ratio, but I don't know,
there is
interesting. So there's some,
there is
I
a
agree with you,
visual
there's something that
distortion.
happens
Yeah.
when you crop the image. But it's tough because sometimes you have a great image and there's something on the edge of the frame.
And it's what there is at the edge of the frame, because sometimes you get something on the edge of the frame that kind of works.
Mhm.
You get just enough of somebody's body that it's okay to be there, or you'll get too little of somebody's body and it looks odd being there. So again, it's watching the corners of your frame when you're shooting, which is probably the hardest thing to do, because you very often don't see that until you're going to the end. So watching the corners of a frame while you're setting up the shot. And I go through periods where I go out and I shoot and I'm like, how did I come home with 800 pictures? And then I go home, go the next day and I come home with 40 pictures and I'm like, well, it was just as interesting. Why did I come home with 40 pictures? But I made a lot more purposeful decisions. Sometimes you lose great shots in between that way as well. So you can go either way, too much or too little.
So are you saying that a lot of it is gut? Like, does it become a gut instinct from the amount of photos you've done
Yes.
and that becomes habit? Or is it the raw talent leading you along this path in the first place from the get-go?
I think it's guts a lot of times. But again, I tell everybody, shoot over and over again the same thing. Obviously even shooting landscapes. I think if you were shooting landscapes all the time, you would go back and see something different. You should go back at different times of the day to see where the light works best.
That's one of my things. There's a place in Central Park I go to, and I have it in every single season.
Right.
And
that's
alone,
a
when you-
series, that's
when
a
you put
story.
the four together, you see them in different clothes, the different, like, the green, the brown, the whites, etc.
And that would be considered a story.
I mean, it's over the course of like 15 years, but.
Wow, that's a good, that's a
That's a brilliant series.
One of my
Yeah.
mentors, because my plan is to do a book on Trinidad,
It's not
but
like
not
every
to do
15 years,
Trinidad
it's like I
Carnival.
took one and then like
Yeah.
5 years later, next
You
one.
took another one. But one of my mentors just released a book. And, everybody's been saying to me, when are you doing the book? When are you doing the book? When are you doing the book? And I'm like, listen, it's going to take a little while. It's still forming in my head all the way for where I want to go. I think I have a year's worth of work. And I was so encouraged the other day. She released a book. She's been working on it for 13 years. But she's been documenting her teenage sons growing up and their friends and their life. But it's taken her 13 years. She probably could have completed a book of their years pretty fast, but she just kept, and there may be 1 picture, 2 pictures, 3 pictures that she chose out of a whole year of shooting. But you have to have that time. And again, it's that time of, are you shooting for selling? Because if you're shooting for selling and you're just shooting for selling to a magazine or a newspaper, they just want now. If you're shooting for a client, Michelle, you know, they just want it now. There's no time to develop. So if you're doing this, it has to be a personal project, and it has to be something that you're committed to doing and finding something to keep going at. And so yes, then it starts being gut and purposeful at the same time. But a lot of it is gut. To me, a lot of it is gut. I shoot.
I just wondered if I was weird, that's all. If I am weird, at least we're weird together. 'Cause literally, I'll just be walking around and just be like,
Yeah.
just something about it, and it's only afterwards when I look back, and it might be the angles or the light or the clothes or something, my subconscious was like, take that now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yet if I were to try and do it, I'd never get it.
But it's also,
I'd
when
be
you
there
say
forever.
gut, it's also the result of the repetition. So it's the training. You're training your eye and
to see it.
you see it, you know, like, so when you put the camera up to when you put the viewfinder up to your eye, you know, at a certain point in your development, you just kind of automatically know to adjust the shutter speed and anything. You don't think and go, should I do F5 or should I do F8? You know, you just,
so that
it kind of
becomes
happens, right?
instinct,
And
yeah.
you automatically, you look at the edges of your frame, you know, so it's through practice. So that kind of becomes the gut.
But,
Yeah.
but if I'm a kid, like the first picture I took of this place in Central Park, I think I was 16. On the old, big, heavy camera, you have to put the film in, like real old school. I didn't know what a light was, what a aperture was, what anything was. And it came out really good. And that's, I think, when I started going, maybe I have an eye for it, but I've always had an eye for design. Like, I'm a designer by trade. So I didn't know if that was like a handy trade off, like a crossover.
It does help, I think. I think it does help if you have a visual aspect for color art. There are people who I think are way more technical than I am. And they will tell you down to the last ounce of what needs to be put. And I'm like, really? I just kind of, I'm going with this. You know, and I do, like, okay, so last year, I mean, because, you know, I want to get in the water with the Baptists and photograph them. I truly want to get in the water with the Baptists and photograph them. So last year, I'm like driving downtown, Shout to Baptist Day was this Saturday. I had no camera on me, which is shameful. And I see these Baptist women walking up the street, and I say to them, is there something happening? And they're like, yeah, there's something in town hall. And I'm like, can I come in and photograph? And there I am in like jeans and a little t-shirt, no camera on me, right? And I'm like, yeah. And so they said, yeah, you could come. I said, so what time does it start? And they're like, 10. I'm looking at my clock, and I'm like, well, it's 10:20. Oh, well, this is Trinidad, right? So I drive home, I come back, I end up in the town hall. I've never been in the town hall. I don't know anything about it. I figure it's something a little bit small, right? And I go and I stand outside, there's a whole new bunch of Baptist women, and I said, you know what, I'm working on some photography in Trinidad. I'm a Trinidad photographer. I'm working on maybe doing a book eventually. Can I photograph? Yeah, go in. And of course, young girl tells me, go in. The older women say to her, you need to take her inside. She's a guest. Okay. They open the door, and I've never been in town hall, and it's like 16 times this, and it is people from wall to wall, and they're all Baptists, and I'm like, maybe here's not the best plan for me. But I crawled in, and I crawled along the ground, and I took pictures, and I've got a fabulous shot from it that I truly love. And I think it actually made me on one of the look. Yeah.
Oh.
What is that for? Yeah, this is a shot from inside. I love it. I really do love the shot. And I would go back this year. But then Fitzgerald Hine got on stage and started to talk about all sorts of things. And I was like, ooh, maybe this is not the best place for me. And I crawl along the back wall. And this little old Baptist woman stopped me and said, darling, are you leaving? And I said, well, you know what? I don't feel very comfortable. I'm not dressed. You all look so beautiful, and you've got your long skirts, and I'm in tight jeans, and She's like, sweetheart, you can stay here. You know, but if I didn't force myself when I got through that door, I'm not going to have this. And the idea of being there just because I'm going to try this, you know what, this year I will be back in there. And I will have a much better idea of what I want to photograph, and I'll be dressed in a long skirt. And I'll wrap my head up.
And you've
I don't think that's possible.
and you've probably made a few contacts. So like
Yeah,
you're not a
well,
stranger. You know, you have some people you'll be like, hey,
I'm
yeah.
loving that. Literally home invasion, but in a good way. I love it.
But I literally have never been told no. I have never been told no about people when you ask them to photograph something about Trinidad and their religion. And religion things I worry about more than anything else. Like, you know what I mean? Could I really be in a Baptist hall?
You used to ask permission, I think that's why.
I do ask permission.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what works for me. What works for me sometimes is I don't look for the prettiest people in the room. I love taking pictures of old people. I love taking pictures, well, children. I try. I'm banned from taking pictures of children on National Geographic trips. We're not allowed to take children or animals. Because everybody just goes, oh, that's so cute. And that's the end of your critique, right? So I love old people. So I look for strange looking old people in a room. And that will always open up the whole of the rest of the room. Because when I look for somebody who somebody doesn't think is traditionally pretty, and they can see I'm genuinely interested in photographing them, it always opens up for me.
And you don't use a flash.
I don't use a flash. And that's not to say flash is not great. Flash works great for some people. I just don't do well with it. I don't. Plus, I love what the light does without a flash. Any other questions? Well, I hope.
Just related to the flash. So without a flash, is there any like ISO level you would say, well, no, that's too much noise?
Yeah, I try not to go too high on ISO levels. Once I start going to 4,000, 8,000, I'm like, you know what, the noise is not going to be worth it. Although the new cameras are so good that it, you know, unless you're printing this on a huge scale, you're never going to notice it. But then that sometimes means that you're waiting. Like sometimes I even wait for another photographer who has light, and it bounces enough light off. And they're busy, and I'm like, okay, there's where I'm going to catch. Right? Or I just wait for something else to be happening because I like just that little bit of light and where it falls. When I'm photographing and on stage, you know, I look for where the light is falling best on the stage and then try and do that same thing. In terms of editing, guys, the best thing I can suggest for anybody is bring images, sit down and be open for people to give you feedback. And sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes you have what you think is a fabulous image. Sometimes you have that image that you know you sat down there and you waited 45 minutes and you climbed a tree and you leant over and nearly fell over and you got that picture and you show it and everybody's like, what? And you start telling the whole story about why you think the picture is great. Well, the picture's not great. It's great because you worked for it. You know? So that is the hardest part. And it really, I encourage everybody. I think Sarita, it's a really good project to do. If people are open to it, bring in 5 images, bring in 10 images. It could be a series. It could be a story. It could be something that you just are not sure whether it works. And be open to what other people see. I could tell you, I've been doing these trips for 5-6 years. I've put up stuff that I think is great, and I've seen better. Like, I really like that. And they're like, did you not see that pole in the background? And I'm like, no, I really didn't see that pole in the background. Or my mother will say now, you know, did you see the pole running through between the legs that were behind them in the picture? Those things are really... And you don't see them because you know how you worked for that picture and what works with it.
So just as an FYI, people need to essentially be willing to do a session with people who want to feedback on images and how to submit to international competitions and stuff. That'll be coming up in a few months.
Okay.
And also have
First in line.
portfolio reviews planned Yes, in a few months.
Do you do that after the safari? Do you kind of sit down and
We have 2 sessions really, and then we have safari feedback. So when people come in and they can submit for a general show and tell and critique on it. And then like later on in the end of the year session, it's a critique session after the competition.
And I promise I will be brutal. I will give you what I see, and I will question on if you have it going for a story or if it's just something that, you're photographing and you want to try something different. My next trip is nicely Vietnam. Be very interesting to see. But yeah, so, the critique and whether it's local or foreign, or I probably won't critique a whole lot of landscape, but I'll see with those things. My guidance is generally related, and if you want to work with people and placements, and one of the things I suggest for you is that if you're on social media, start looking at all your work in chunks of stories. So my social media pages now, so I do Life Pics is my Facebook, and Life Pics, you'll see all my albums now are more of a story. So I will actually take, whereas in the past I would just throw up Romania and I would throw up all my favorite shots from Romania, now I'll actually do a grouping that's a train station. And it may be less pictures, and I'll do a grouping that was about the cows and milking. And if you start thinking about stuff as a grouping, it's a great way to get you prepared for submitting work internationally. Because they do look for, any competition you're going into, they're looking for a group of work that speaks and works together. Any other questions? Thank you, everybody. I hope.
You're going to say something, you hope.
I hope everybody enjoyed. And I'm happy to do the critiques.